Have you ever worked underground? Really underground, deep in the bowels of the city, in places where people never set foot, in a labyrinth of concrete and steel, a kingdom of darkness where not a single ray of sunlight reaches. You haven't? Then you're lucky. But now that you're about to hear this story, you'll come to know the rules of the underground. And once you know them, every time you see a manhole cover, you'll remember what moves beneath it, what waits below. My name is Michael Johnson. 3 months ago, I broke every rule of the underground, out of ignorance, out of foolishness. This is the result. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., I hear the sound of claws scraping metal from the drain in my apartment. Slowly, rhythmically, as if something is carving my name. It's calling me back to the underground. Come back, it says. Tonight, that time is approaching again. It's almost 3:17 a.m. It all started 3 months ago on a Monday with a phone call from Chief Decker.
Johnson, I need you to come to the office right now. We need to talk about Nolan.
The moment I hung up, my chest grew heavy. Nolan Harris, 52 years old. For the 2 years since I'd been assigned to the sewer maintenance division, he had been my mentor. Stubborn and quiet, but he knew more about the underground than anyone. A man who seemed to have memorized every vein and nerve of the underground system. That Nolan hadn't been able to stop coughing since yesterday. Not just any cough. A wet, rasping sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. When I arrived at the office, Chief Decker's expression told me everything. An exhausted face, deep furrows between his brows.
Nolan's been hospitalized. He has lung problems. The doctor says he needs 2 weeks of absolute rest and high-dose steroid treatment.
I was speechless. I worried that this might force Nolan into early retirement. Losing such an experienced worker would be a huge loss for the entire department.
But don't worry. Nolan's had episodes like this from time to time since he turned 45. Underground air isn't good for your health. He's used to it. The question is whether you can handle his work alone until he comes back.
I thought it over. I didn't want to take on more than I could handle. The underground was a complex and dangerous place. Could I manage it alone? But I remembered Nolan's words, the rules he had taught me repeatedly for working underground.
Michael, remember 3 things when working underground.
He always said, always before important work.
First, carry proper lighting. At least 3 lights, including backups. Second, never enter a hole where you can't see the bottom, no matter how urgent the work is. Third, if something feels wrong, don't look for reasons, get back to the surface immediately. As long as you follow these rules, the underground won't hurt you.
At the time, I thought they were just safety measures, an extension of OSHA regulations, workplace wisdom at best. I had no idea they were rules that meant the difference between life and death. I had no idea they were a contract with the inhabitants of the underground passed down for thousands of years. I finally nodded. I believed everything would be fine as long as I followed the rules. As long as I faithfully followed Nolan's teachings, nothing should go wrong. Chief Decker looked relieved.
Once you pass the GED exam, you'll become Nolan's official apprentice. And when he retires, you'll be the head of the sewer repair division. Division head means a raise and increased benefits. You'll be looking at about $8,000 more per year.
That was the future I had hoped for. For someone like me who had dropped out of high school, getting a GED and stable work was a chance to change my life, a path that would reassure my mother and give me hope for the future. That day, I went home filled with hope. I still didn't know that hope and despair sometimes come through the same door. The first few days passed without incident. You've probably experienced it too. That moment when you start getting used to a new environment, when the initial tension begins to fade. That's what happened to me. As I repeated basic tasks under Nolan's strict guidance and learned the fundamentals of the underground world, my fear gradually began to diminish. Underground work was more monotonous than I had expected. Pipe inspections, water level measurements, simple cleaning. As I repeated these tasks, I fell into the illusion that I had conquered the underground world. On the morning of the third day, Nolan called me over.
Starting today, you'll be handling a small section on your own.
His words made my heart race. I thought I had been recognized. Foolishly.
You remember, don't you? There are 3 rules.
Nolan emphasized.
Carry proper lighting, don't enter holes where you can't see the bottom, and if something feels wrong, get back to the surface immediately.
I nodded confidently. At that time, I couldn't understand that these rules were the boundary between life and death. At 10 a.m., I descended underground alone for the first time. Above ground, spring sunlight illuminated the city, and people's laughter could be heard. But the moment I opened the manhole cover, that warm world was shut out. As I climbed down the iron ladder rung by rung, I realized I was literally stepping into another world. The assigned area was a small tributary slightly off the main route. Inspection of old sewer pipes and simple cleaning work. It should have been perfect for a newcomer. Before I left, Senior Nolan told me,
There are 3 rules underground. First, always report your current location to your supervisor. Second, don't enter holes where you can't see the bottom. Third,
he hesitated for a moment, then added,
if something feels wrong, get back to the surface immediately.
His expression at that moment had the gravity characteristic of an experienced worker. The moment I descended underground, I felt the difference in the air. It was more humid than the main route, with a faint smell of decay drifting through, but I interpreted it as just the smell of old pipes. Looking back now, that smell was subtly different from the odor of organic decay. It was older, more deeply rooted rot, an inexplicable stench as if time itself had decayed. The first 2 hours went smoothly. The flashlight beam reliably illuminated the ground beneath my feet, and work proceeded as planned. I was even humming to myself. I actually felt liberated by the freedom of being alone. Without the watchful eyes from above, I could work at my own pace. I had the obligation to report my status regularly via radio, but otherwise it was completely my time. This is easy even for a newcomer, I muttered to myself as I carefully cleaned the grime from the pipes. But the underground world didn't overlook my carelessness. It happened in an instant. I was walking on an old iron grate when suddenly the ground beneath my feet collapsed. The rusted metal let out a scream-like sound as it shattered, and my body was sucked into the darkness. Just before falling, I instinctively reached for my radio, but gravity overcame my will. The voice trying to shout, "Mayday, Mayday," was drowned out by the sound of rushing wind. My helmet came off my head, and work tools scattered as they fell with me into the darkness. Have you ever fallen from a great height? That sensation where time seems stretched out. During those weightless seconds, I remembered Nolan's second rule.
Don't enter holes where you can't see the bottom.
Ironically, this time the hole had invited me in. During the fall, I was strangely calm. I observed the surrounding walls and noticed that old stonework was mixed with new concrete. This wasn't just a pipe accident. This hole had been intentionally hidden. The fall felt like an eternity, but it was probably only about 5 seconds. I crashed into cold water and lost consciousness. Just before hitting the water surface, I saw it. Something was moving beneath the surface. It wasn't a fish. It was bigger, moving in a more unnatural way. But with the impact, consciousness sank into darkness. I woke to the sound of water. The first thing I felt was cold. My body temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. My lips had lost sensation, and my fingertips had turned bluish white. I didn't know how long I had been unconscious, but judging by my body's condition, at least several hours had passed. My whole body ached. Especially my right shoulder and left side were throbbing intensely. But I didn't seem to have any broken bones. I could move. I tasted blood in my mouth, but all my teeth were intact. When I crawled out of the water, my footsteps echoed strangely. From the acoustic effect, this seemed to be a considerably large space. The ceiling height appeared to be at least 5 meters or more. I was surrounded by complete darkness. The flashlight had broken from the impact of the fall. Only my smartphone's light provided a small amount of illumination. Battery remaining 78%. I still had time. The radio was completely destroyed. The circuit board was exposed and water had gotten in. Communication with the surface was completely cut off. GPS was also out of range. All of modern technology was powerless in this place, and I understood that this was a place not on any map. An old stone passageway continued ahead. Moist air clung to my skin, and the sound of dripping water from somewhere in the distance echoed unnaturally loud. This wasn't a modern sewer system. It was something older, something deeper. The stonework was sophisticated, clearly made using techniques different from modern construction. The stones bore chisel marks, evidence of careful hand carving, a finish imbued with craftsman's soul that modern machinery couldn't create. However, there were no decorative elements whatsoever, a purely functional structure, as if it had been built to contain something. About 10 minutes after I started walking, I noticed the first anomaly. The footsteps sounded strange. Somewhere, other footsteps were echoing in rhythm with my pace. When I stopped, those sounds stopped too. When I started walking again, they resumed, too regular to be an echo. There were scratch marks on the walls, not human fingernails, longer, deeper marks. The traces carved into the stone surface looked like evidence of something struggling violently. The scratches formed 4 parallel lines, with spacing between the claws impossible for human hands. I traced the marks with my finger. Considering the hardness of the stone, considerable force would have been needed to make such deep scratches. Impossible with human nails. And at the bottom of the scratches, some black substance was adhered. Not blood, something more viscous, an unknown secretion. While shining my smartphone light, I examined the scratches closely. They were fresh. Stone dust was still scattered around them. Made within 24 hours, possibly within just a few hours. I pinched some of the stone dust with my fingers. It was still damp. This meant the scratches had been made after I fell. While I was here, something had passed through this place, and I realized a spine-chilling fact. The scratches continued in the direction I was heading, as if something was leading the way ahead of me. It wasn't just scratches on the walls. There were similar marks on the floor too, traces of something moving on all 4s. Tracks. No, they weren't tracks. More accurately, traces of something writhing. The trail left on the wet stone was clearly not human, about 80 centimeters wide with length continuing beyond recognition. And on both sides of the trail, deep holes appeared periodically, as if something sharp had pierced the stone. I realized I was not alone. In this darkness, something was waiting for me. It began with a faint sound, a rustling noise, like a large insect crawling around. But the sound was too loud for an insect. It was the sound of something human-sized crawling across the stone floor. I stopped and held my breath. listening intently. The sound was approaching. It moved with a regular rhythm, clearly with intention. With trembling hands, I held up my smartphone and directed the light toward the sound. At first, I saw nothing, but as the light steadied, I caught sight of a shadow in the passage ahead. It had a human-like shape, but it was not human. It moved on all fours, with abnormally long arms and legs. The joints were positioned differently from those of a human. And most terrifying of all was that it noticed my light and slowly turned around. The face, if I could call it a face, was indiscernible. Not because of the distance. Despite the light shining on it, I could see nothing there. There was only shadow. Only deep darkness that seemed to absorb the light. It stared at me intently. For at least 5 seconds, we gazed at each other. And when it slowly began to stand up, I understood I had to run. I ran. Forgetting reason and rules, I simply ran desperately. Behind me, I could hear the sound of pursuit, the sound of that abnormal creature chasing after me. The footsteps were not human. The sound of 4 limbs striking the stone floor and occasionally echoing scratching sounds. It was definitely tracking me. The sound maintained a steady rhythm. Like a predator accustomed to hunting, I could sense it trying to corner me with efficient, wasteless movements. The passages branched like a maze. I turned left, then right, then left again. There was no choice. I could only keep running in the direction away from my pursuer. My breathing became labored, and my chest began to ache. Even the stamina I had built through years of underground work was approaching its limit in this terrified sprint. Sweat got in my eyes, blurring my vision. Still, I couldn't stop. I no longer knew where I was running, but I couldn't stop. The sounds of pursuit gradually grew more distant, but there was no time for relief. I was completely lost, and my smartphone battery had dropped to 60%. When I stopped to observe my surroundings, I understood a terrifying truth. This underground world was not naturally formed. It was an intentionally constructed structure. Ancient characters, hieroglyphic-like symbols that I couldn't decipher, were carved into the passage walls. I approached the wall and ran my palm over the surface of the characters. The grooves carved into the stone were deep, remaining clearly visible despite centuries of time. I could sense the desperate will of whoever had carved them. This was not mere decoration. It was an urgent message. The characters appeared to be warnings. The same symbols that appeared repeatedly probably meant danger or keep out. Ancient people had sealed something away here, and bones were scattered everywhere. They were human bones. I also found scraps of clothing and old shoes. Some appeared relatively recent, perhaps from a few years ago, maybe even a few months ago. There had been people before me who had wandered into this place, and they had. With trembling hands, I picked up a work helmet that lay nearby. It was standard equipment from the city's sewer management bureau. Inside, the name Watson was written in magic marker. Watson, a colleague who had gone missing last autumn. Officially, it had been processed as an accident during work. I didn't want to think about it, but reality mercilessly thrust the truth upon me. Many of the bones were crushed. There were marks as if something had gnawed and crushed them. I remembered other sewer workers, colleagues who had gone missing over the past few years. Their disappearances processed as accidents. Perhaps they had all been here. When I ventured deeper, I made the worst discovery. The passage suddenly opened up, and as I emerged into a vast cavity, I gasped. The ceiling was so high it couldn't be seen, like an underground cathedral. There, dozens, perhaps hundreds of creatures were writhing about. They were the same type I had encountered earlier, but these were in a group. They moved in circles, surrounding something in the center. Their movement had clear order. This was not a wild pack. They were intelligent beings with an organized society. I cautiously directed my light toward them. In the center was a massive egg-like structure. It was translucent, and I could see something writhing inside. And the creatures in the group were clearly protecting it. Occasionally, one would approach the egg and gently stroke its surface with a front limb. It was behavior that suggested maternal affection. There was not just one egg. Throughout the cavity, eggs of various sizes were arranged. Some had already hatched, with small creatures crawling around. The adults watched over the young, sometimes bringing them food. I didn't want to think about what that food might be, but the pile of bones stacked in the corner of the cavity told the story. I realized this was their nest, and I had wandered into the deepest part of their territory. This ancient structure might have been a prison built to isolate them from the surface world. But now, that seal had been broken. The expansion of the sewer system had connected their world with the human world. One of the creatures in the group turned toward me, and it let out a high-pitched cry. That voice was a warning signal. Instantly, the other creatures also noticed my presence. Hundreds of eyes stared at me all at once, and low growling sounds echoed throughout the cavity. Before the entire group noticed me, I quietly retreated, but it was already too late. The creature that had first spotted me let out a louder warning sound. It was clearly a signal to its companions. I could see creatures throughout the cavity beginning to move all at once, heading in my direction. Escape seemed hopeless. The complex maze-like passages and creatures lurking everywhere. I was completely lost. I tried to retrace my path, but I couldn't even remember which passage I had come from. With my mind confused by fear, it was impossible to maintain accurate directional sense. My smartphone battery had dropped below 30%. I switched to power saving mode, but even then, it would only last a few hours at most. I leaned against the wall, nearly overwhelmed by despair. Nolan's face floated into my mind. Would he be looking for me? But no one should know where I was. Would I die in a place that didn't exist on any map? I thought of my family. I thought of my lover. They would accept my death as an accident. They would never know the truth. From the distance, I could hear sounds of pursuit. Multiple footsteps striking the stone floor. They were searching for me systematically. There was no time. Then, I felt a faint breeze. The wind was coming from above. The presence of airflow meant there was an exit. I desperately searched for the source of the wind. I directed my flashlight toward the ceiling and moved forward, feeling for air movement. After searching for a while, I discovered old stone steps. They were built hidden against the wall, appearing at first glance to be merely stone protrusions. The stairs were narrow and steep, ascending upward. The treads were worn smooth from years of use, indicating that many people had used these stairs since ancient times. As I began climbing, the wind definitely grew stronger. Fresh air entered my lungs, reviving hope. After climbing for about 20 minutes, I saw light in the distance. It was natural light. I summoned my remaining strength and ran up the stairs. My footsteps echoed in the cavity, and I began to hear pursuit sounds from below. They had found me. I could sense multiple creatures gathering at the bottom of the stairs, looking up. However, strangely, they did not climb the stairs. Something seemed to be preventing them. Perhaps it was fear of the light. The exit was at the bottom of an old well. A rusted iron ladder continued upward. Moss grew on the sides of the well, and there was a damp smell. Without hesitation, I leaped onto the ladder. The ladder creaked several times along the way, but held firm. Angry cries echoed from below, but whether they disliked light or not, They did not pursue me into the well. 10 meters, 15 meters, 20 meters. I desperately continued climbing the ladder. My palms were cut by rust and blood seeped out, but I felt no pain. And then, I crawled out onto the surface. The afternoon sunlight enveloped my face. I collapsed onto the grass, feeling the sun's rays with my entire body. Alive. I had returned alive. Looking around, I found myself in a small park on the outskirts of the city. The old well stood in the corner of the park, usually covered, but for some reason it was open today. Perhaps it was fate's guidance. But that experience had changed me. There is a world underground that we know nothing about, and it is far from friendly. As I basked in the sunlight, I truly understood the meaning of Nolan's rules. He had known the truth about the underground, the real cause of our colleagues' deaths, and why he had imposed such strict rules on us. Several weeks have passed since that day, and I have now been transferred to surface work. Officially, the reason was lack of aptitude, but I know the truth. Those who know the truth are never sent underground again. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I heard that crawling sound, and every time I see news of the successive missing sewer worker accidents in the city, my chest tightens. I'm overwhelmed by the helplessness of knowing the truth, but being unable to do anything about it. But as long as there is sunlight, I am safe. At least, that's what I believe. And I now deeply understand the weight of what he confessed to me in that morning report. When I crawled up to the surface, my entire body was covered in mud and blood. It was past 5 a.m. Nolan was waiting by the work vehicle, smoking a cigarette, but when he saw me, his expression changed completely. The cigarette slipped from between his fingers.
What happened?
With a trembling voice, I told him everything. The fall into the underground, the ancient structures, and those creatures. Even as I spoke, a smell different from the typical decay of sewers rose from my clothes, something old and viscerally bestial. Nolan's face gradually turned pale. When I finished speaking, he remained silent for a long time. As the sounds of the city beginning to wake could be heard in the distance, he spoke unexpected words.
Michael, listen carefully. Don't tell anyone what you just told me.
But that's dangerous. We need to warn people.
Warn them?
Nolan smiled bitterly.
You still don't understand. We've known they were there from the beginning.
My blood froze. The morning chill suddenly felt like it was piercing my skin.
Do you remember the 3 rules? They weren't created by chance. They're lessons learned through the bloodshed of our predecessors. Why we avoid night work, why we never go underground alone, why we retreat immediately when we hear strange sounds. All of it is rules for coexisting with them.
His voice carried a heavy fatigue, like the voice of a man about to be crushed by the weight of carrying secrets for years. Does the city administration know too?
Some know, others don't. But it's never spoken of openly. To avoid panic and
Nolan stared into the distance.
to avoid provoking them.
I was beginning to understand. This city's sewer system wasn't just infrastructure. It was a fragile peace treaty between humans and unknown beings. A blood-stained agreement maintained for generations.
In the past, several people tried to expose the secret. Local reporters, activists, curious researchers.
Nolan's voice grew quiet.
They all disappeared one day. Missing person reports were filed, but the searches were only perfunctory. And a few weeks later, only scraps of clothing were found deep in the sewers. What you saw tonight won't be recorded in any report. We'll process it as a fall accident due to pipe damage. Understood?
I could only nod, but something deep in my heart was sounding an alarm. On the way home, I looked around the city. Ordinary residential areas, ordinary shops, ordinary people. An elderly man jogging in the early morning, a housewife coming out to get the newspaper, children in uniforms heading to school. None of them knew what lurked beneath their feet. 3 weeks have passed since then. On the surface, I returned to normal life. Daytime work, conversations with colleagues, dinner at home. But everything had changed. I became sensitive to sounds, hypersensitive to smells, and began to sense something in the darkness. When showering, I feared something might crawl up from the drain. In the sound of hot water flowing, I thought I heard faint breathing mixed in. When walking through the city, I felt gazes from beneath the manhole covers, especially at dusk when the streetlights began to turn on. That sensation grew stronger. At night, lying in bed, I thought I heard faint scratching sounds from beyond the walls. Regular sounds, as if something was confirming my presence. My colleagues noticed my change.
Michael, you haven't seemed well lately.
Jim called out to me.
Ever since that night, you've looked pale, like you've seen a ghost, or...
He realized the meaning of his own words and closed his mouth. For people in our line of work, talk of things that shouldn't be seen was taboo. I forced a smile. I'm fine, just a little tired. But in reality, I had become unable to sleep. Every night, those scenes returned. Writhing shadows, wet breathing sounds, and those countless eyes. In my dreams, I was underground again, surrounded by those creatures. I would wake up with my pillow soaked in sweat. Nolan began avoiding me. When I spoke to him, he would only give minimal responses. Sometimes I felt fear dwelling in his eyes when he looked at me, because I knew too much, or because I was beginning to change into something. Was he afraid that I would expose the secret? Or was it something else? On Tuesday of the 4th week, strange things began to happen. In the morning, while brushing my teeth at the wash basin, I felt something wrong with my eyes in the mirror. My pupils appeared abnormally large, like a cat's eyes, as if trying to efficiently capture light. And I noticed that I could see things more easily in the dark. When I got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, I could clearly see the room without turning on the lights. At work, I began to perceive my colleagues' body odors as abnormally strong, especially the smells of sweat and fear. I could distinguish them as if sniffing out prey. I could tell by smell when Jim was nervous, when Tom was lying. Disgusting. The moment that thought entered my head, I shuddered. Why had I thought such a thing? Realizing that I was recognizing my colleagues as prey, my spine went cold. During lunch break, sitting alone on a park bench eating a sandwich, I felt faint vibrations from beneath the ground. Something was moving. Something large. Something running freely through the underground. I stood up and stared at my feet. Beneath the asphalt, in the sewers, they were active. And I could tell. I didn't know why I could tell, but I could tell for certain. Like old memories resurfacing, I could understand their movements as clearly as if I could see them. In the evening, Nolan stopped me.
Michael,
He choked on his words.
haven't you noticed anything strange lately? With your health? Or your senses?
What do you mean?
Well, it's just,
He stared into my eyes, then turned pale.
no way, your eyes, they're different from before.
His hand unconsciously reached for his tool belt, gripping the handle of his hammer. Just then, an emergency call came in. A major sinkhole accident in District 3. We hurried to the scene. In the car, Nolan didn't say a word. He just kept watching me through the rearview mirror. And now, 3:17 a.m. I am in my bedroom at home, writing this. 2 months have passed since then. I don't want to talk about what we saw at that sinkhole site anymore. I can only say that the situation is more serious than imagined, and that my changes haven't stopped either. Now, darkness feels like a friend. The underground smells are nostalgic and comforting. There's a part of me that seeks something more primitive than human food. And now, the scratching sounds from the drain. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound stopped. No, it didn't stop. It's getting closer. The sound of something coming up the stairs. The sound of walking down the hallway. I want to tell you something. If you're reading this, please listen carefully to the sounds around you right now. From the sewers, from the drains, from under the floor, can't you hear faint sounds? That's the sound of summoning. The voice calling to kin. My hands are shaking. The letters are becoming messy. Because I now understand. What I saw underground that night wasn't just unknown creatures. It was evolutionary possibility, the next stage of humanity. And I was chosen as a member of the new species. Looking in the mirror, I no longer have human eyes. But they're not ugly. They're beautiful, perfectly adapted eyes for living in the underground world. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound comes from beneath the floor. No, it's almost here now. Standing in front of the front door. I warn you, when you finish reading this, leave your house immediately. Get away from underground. Evacuate to high ground. And never walk alone through the city at night. Ah, I see a shadow under the door. Thin fingers, claws that are too long, and something with the same eyes as mine is peering through the gap in the door. Beautiful eyes, eyes full of understanding. They've come to get me, like family waiting for someone to come home. This will probably be my last message. You'll understand eventually too. We all return underground eventually, as long as we continue to live in this city, and it's never a bad thing. The underground is warm, safe, and full of understanding. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I heard the sound of the doorknob turning. I stand up. I'm no longer afraid. Finally, it's time to go home.